Kayla was last seen at a McDonald's in Antigo with a family friend. He told police he dropped Kayla off at a boyfriend's house in Wausau. Multiple searches were done, including at a suspect's home and workplace, but no one has ever been charged in her disappearance.
She gets into a car. She stops at McDonald's. She talks to a friend for what feels like an ordinary moment. Then she is dropped near a condemned house. After that, 15-year-old Kayla Berg is never seen again. No confirmed sighting. No phone call home. No message. No answer. Just one of the most haunting missing person cases in Wisconsin. Before we go further, most people who watch these cases never subscribe, and then they miss the updates that matter. If you care about missing person cases, cold cases, and stories that still need answers, subscribe, turn on notifications, and comment your location below. It helps more people see Kayla's name. And in a case like this, that still matters. Kayla Berg was not a mystery to the people who loved her. She was a real girl with a real life, a teenager with plans, habits, moods, and routines. She was social, active. She loved dance and gymnastics. She was on her school's dance team, and she wanted to become a choreographer. The people around her did not describe her as someone who simply erased herself and started over. They described her as responsible, careful, and excited for life that was still right in front of her. She was born in Wausau, Wisconsin, and grew up in central Wisconsin, splitting time between family homes in Antigo and Wausau. In the months before she vanished, her life had already been unsettled. In May of 2009, Kayla and her mother moved to Texas while her older brother stayed back in Antigo. But the move did not last. Her father, James, was dealing with cancer, and Kayla wanted to come back. By the end of July, mother and daughter had returned to Wisconsin. It should have felt like homecoming. Instead, it became the final chapter anyone can clearly trace. That summer had started to worry the adults around her. Local reporting years later said Kayla had begun going out more, meeting older boys, and spending time at parties. Just days before she vanished, there had already been one scare when Kayla and a friend stayed out overnight, and their parents panicked before learning they were safe. That fear came, then passed, but it left a mark. It showed how quickly a normal summer night could turn into every parent's nightmare. Then came Tuesday, August 11th, 2009. Kayla was 15 years old, just weeks away from turning 16. That evening, she was picked up from her father's home by Kevin Kilcheski, a 24-year-old friend of her older brother. According to Kayla's mother and police, Kevin was not a stranger to the family. He had been around before. He had eaten at their table. That detail matters, because it explains why nobody would have seen this car ride as an instant emergency. Familiarity can lower your guard faster than anything else. Police later said there may have been marijuana use during that outing. What is clear is that, sometime around 9:30 that night, the two stopped at a McDonald's. Kayla went inside and spoke briefly with a friend who was working there. It was a calm interaction. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that signaled danger. According to police, that exchange at McDonald's is now treated as the last confirmed time anyone saw Kayla alive. The ordinariness of that moment makes it worse. Sometimes the last scene is not chaos. Sometimes it is fluorescent lights, a short conversation, and a promise to talk later that never happens. After that, the timeline turns dark. Kevin later told investigators he drove Kayla roughly 35 miles to Wausau and dropped her off near the home of her on-again, off-again boyfriend, Miguel Marrero. There was one problem. That house had been condemned and was under renovation. There was another problem. According to Kayla's mother and investigators, Kayla knew Miguel had already moved. She had reportedly been to his new place before. So why would she ask to be dropped at the old address? Why there? Why at night? Why at a property that, by then, should not have made sense to her at all? That question has haunted this case for years. If Kevin's account was accurate, then Kayla stepped out into the dark near a place she knew was no longer the right house. If his account was wrong, then the entire case had started from a false final sighting. And if someone else was meant to meet her, nobody has ever proved it. No camera footage closes the gap. No tracked phone leads police straight to an answer. Kayla did not have a cell phone or computer investigators could use to rebuild her last movements. In a case like this, that missing digital trail becomes its own kind of silence. The next day, Kayla's father realized she had not come home. Her mother, Hope, started calling around, trying to find out which friend Kayla might be with. That uncertainty slowed everything down. At first, there was confusion rather than immediate alarm. Kayla had stayed with friends before. Maybe she was at a party. Maybe she was with her boyfriend. Maybe there was an explanation waiting just one phone call away. But the calls did not fix it. They only made the story feel stranger. According to later reporting, when Hope contacted Kevin, his responses were delayed and vague. He reportedly said his phone had died and gave uncertain details about where he had dropped Kayla. For nearly a week, the people around Kayla were caught in a terrible place between assumption and dread. It was only about 5 or 6 days later that she was formally reported missing. Police initially classified her as an endangered runaway. That label matters, because in missing person cases, the first hours and first days can shape everything. By the time the case fully shifted from uncertainty into active investigation, the trail was already cold. Once police understood that nobody had heard from Kayla, the case tightened around the last known people and places in her world. Investigators interviewed family members, friends, Kevin, and Miguel. They focused on the condemned house area and nearby streets. Cadaver dogs were eventually brought in. Kevin's car was impounded and examined. Searches widened to nearby woods, vacant lots, and abandoned properties. Investigators also followed up on tips from other places. But no confirmed sighting of Kayla emerged. No physical trace explained where she went. No clear evidence told police whether they were dealing with an abduction, a concealed death, or something even harder to reconstruct. And that is what makes the first stage of this story so disturbing. There is no dramatic crime scene, no body, no public confession, no proven final confrontation. Just a teenager, a ride at night, a stop at McDonald's, and a condemned house that never made sense. The entire case seems to balance on one version of events told by the last known adult to see her. Police have said Kevin was questioned because he was the last known person with Kayla. They also said there is no digital evidence placing him in Wausau that night. That does not answer the mystery. It only deepens it. And then there is the human side of this. Kayla's father later died of cancer without knowing what happened to his daughter. Her mother kept going. Birthday events, public appeals, interviews, refusing to let Kayla's name disappear even as the landmarks connected to the case changed. The McDonald's where Kayla was last confirmed seen has since been torn down. The house Kevin said he dropped her off at has also been torn down. The physical places are disappearing. The questions are not. Because when you strip this case down, one detail keeps standing in the middle of it like a warning sign in the dark. Kayla was supposedly dropped off at a place she knew she was not supposed to be. If that is true, then somebody knows why. If it is not true, then somebody changed the story before the search had even really begun. And that is where this case stops being just a disappearance and starts becoming something far more unsettling. Not because we know what happened, but because the most important version of the last night may have been wrong from the beginning. So let me ask you this. Do you believe Kayla was ever dropped off near that condemned house at all? Or do you think the real last stop happened somewhere else? Comment below. 6 days. That's how long it took before Kayla Berg was officially reported missing. 6 days of uncertainty. 6 days of assumptions. 6 days where the difference between she'll come back and something is wrong quietly slipped out of reach. And in a case like this, 6 days can become 6 years, then 10, then more. By the time the investigation settled into its next phase, the urgency had changed. The active searches slowed. The immediate leads dried up. And Kayla's case became something else entirely. A waiting game. But for her family, there was no such thing as waiting. There was only living without answers. Kayla's mother, Hope, refused to let her daughter's name fade into the background. Every year, on Kayla's birthday, she held events, gatherings, reminders, not just for closure, but for visibility. Because in missing person cases, attention is oxygen. The moment people stop talking, the case begins to disappear. So she kept people talking. She spoke to reporters. She worked with investigators. She answered the same painful questions again and again. What was Kayla like? What happened that night? What do you think really happened? And every time, the truth was the same. She didn't know, but she knew something wasn't right. Because nothing about Kayla's disappearance made sense. Not the location, not the timeline, not the silence that followed. And as the years passed, something else happened. The physical world began to erase the case. The McDonald's where Kayla was last seen was torn down. The condemned house where she was supposedly dropped off was demolished. The spaces that once held the last trace of her movements were gone, replaced by new buildings, new routines, new people who walked past those locations without ever knowing what had happened there. But the case itself didn't disappear. It stayed alive in files, in conversations, and in one place more than anywhere else. The internet. Online forums, discussion boards, and true crime communities picked up the story. People who had never met Kayla began analyzing her case like a puzzle. They questioned the timeline. They questioned the drop-off. They questioned Kevin's account. Some believed she never made it to Wausau. Others believed she met someone else after being dropped off. And some believed the truth was far darker than anyone had publicly admitted. The longer the case remained unsolved, the more theories grew around it. Because when there are no answers, people create their own. Then, years after Kayla vanished, something happened that changed everything. A video resurfaced online. It wasn't new. It had actually been uploaded just months after Kayla disappeared. But for years, it had gone unnoticed, buried in the endless noise of the internet. Until someone watched it again. The video was short, unsettling. It showed a young woman sitting in what looked like a basement. She appeared distressed, afraid, crying. A man's voice could be heard off camera. And almost immediately, people began asking the same question. Is that Kayla? The resemblance was enough to make people pause. The timing made it worse. The idea that a missing girl could have been recorded alive, trapped somewhere, and posted online without anyone realizing it for years. It was the kind of possibility that doesn't just create attention. It creates urgency. The video spread fast. People shared it across platforms. They compared images. They analyzed her voice, her appearance, the background. Some were convinced it was her. Others weren't sure. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. It needed to be investigated. And it was. Law enforcement reviewed the video. They traced it back to its origin. They contacted the people involved in its creation. And then, just as quickly as hope had risen, it collapsed. The video was a hoax. The people in it were actors. It had been staged. It had nothing to do with Kayla. For some people, that was a relief. It meant Kayla had not been trapped in that situation. But for her family, and for those who had followed the case, it was something else. A false lead that reopened a wound. Because for a moment, it felt like progress. For a moment, it felt like the silence had been broken. And then it wasn't. And the case returned to where it had been before. Unanswered, but not forgotten. Because even without that video, something had shifted. The case had gained attention again. New people had learned Kayla's name. New tips came in. Investigators revisited details, hoping that time, technology, or a new perspective might reveal something that had been missed. This is the part of a cold case that most people don't see. It doesn't stay completely still. It moves slowly, quietly, reopening, rechecking, re-examining, hoping that one piece will finally connect everything. And as technology advanced, so did the possibilities. Better forensic methods, improved data analysis, more awareness of how cases can be solved years later. Cases that once seemed impossible were suddenly being reopened and solved. And that raised a question. If those cases could be solved, why not Kayla's? Because when you look at her case closely, it feels like it should have an answer. There was a known last contact, a known driver, a known destination. It wasn't a random disappearance in the middle of nowhere. It was structured, defined, and yet somehow, it still slipped through every attempt to explain it, which leads to something even harder to accept. Sometimes, the truth isn't hidden because it's complex. Sometimes, it's hidden because it was never properly captured in the first place. Because of delays, because of missing evidence, because of one moment where the right question wasn't asked at the right time. And that possibility hangs over Kayla's case like a shadow. Because if something critical was missed in those first days, it may never be recovered. Still, the case remains active. The FBI continues to list Kayla as a missing person. A reward remains in place for information that leads to answers. And her family continues to wait, not just for closure, but for truth. And after all these years, that truth still comes back to the same place. That car, that drive, that drop-off. Everything leads there. Everything begins there. And everything might end there too. So let me ask you this. Do you think the answer to this case still exists in evidence that was already found, or in something that was missed completely in those first 6 days? Comment below. After everything, the searches, the interviews, the years, the false hope, there is still no answer. No confirmed location. No confirmed suspect. No confirmed explanation for what happened to Kayla Berg on that August night. And that is what makes this case different from many others. Because most stories eventually move toward something. A confession, a mistake, a piece of evidence that surfaces years later. A name, but this one doesn't. It stays suspended. And that forces us to ask a harder question. Not just what happened to Kayla, but how a case with this many known details still has no resolution. Because when you strip everything down, the foundation of this case rests on a single version of events. A car ride, a stop at McDonald's, and a drop-off near a condemned house. That's it. Everything else grows out of that. And if even one part of that foundation is wrong, then the entire structure of the case shifts. Because think about it. If Kayla was never actually dropped off at that location, then investigators may have spent crucial time searching the wrong place. If she was dropped off, but someone else was already waiting for her, then that person has never been identified. And if something happened before she was ever supposed to leave that car, then the most important moment in the case happened in a space no one else witnessed. That's the reality of this case. 3 possibilities. Each one leads in a completely different direction, and none of them have been proven. So what can actually be explained? Investigators have said that Kevin Kielczewski was questioned because he was the last known person to see Kayla. His car was examined. His account was recorded. But there has never been a public statement confirming that his story was definitively proven or disproven. At the same time, there has been no evidence publicly linking him to a crime. And that creates a tension that has never been resolved. Because being the last person to see someone doesn't make you guilty. But in cases like this, it makes you central. And when the case never moves forward, that central position never changes. Then there's Miguel Marrero, the boyfriend. He was older, 19 at the time. A relationship that Kayla's mother had already been uneasy about. But when police spoke to him, they said he cooperated. There was no evidence placing Kayla with him that night. So once again, the case stops. Not because there are no people involved, but because there is no proof connecting any of them to what happened next. And that is where the investigation reaches its limit. Because without physical evidence, without a confirmed crime scene, without a body, the case becomes something else entirely. A question, one that has been asked for more than 16 years. What happened to Kayla Berg? Over time, the investigation didn't disappear. It shifted. It became a cold case, which doesn't mean it's closed. It means it's waiting. Waiting for new technology. Waiting for someone to speak. Waiting for something, anything, to change the direction of the story. We've seen it happen before. Cases that sat untouched for decades suddenly break open because of DNA, because of genetic genealogy, because someone, somewhere, finally decides to tell the truth. And when that happens, everything changes. But here's the problem with Kayla's case. There is no known physical evidence to test. No confirmed sample that can be reanalyzed. No biological trace that investigators can use to rebuild what happened. Which means the usual breakthroughs that solve other cold cases may not apply here. Unless something exists that has never been found, or never been connected, or never been reported. And that brings us to the most uncomfortable part of this story. Because sometimes, the answer to a case like this doesn't come from science. It comes from people. From someone who knows more than they've said. From someone who was there. From someone who has carried a secret for years. Because when you look at the timeline, it feels like someone knows something. Someone knows why Kayla would go to that location. Or why she wouldn't. Someone knows whether she ever made it out of that car. Or if she didn't. And yet, that information has never reached investigators in a way that could close the case. And that's where the silence becomes the most powerful force in this story. Because silence doesn't just hide the truth. It protects it. And the longer it lasts, the harder it becomes to break. Still, Kayla's case hasn't been forgotten. The FBI continues to list her as a missing person. A reward remains in place for information that leads to an arrest and conviction. Her family continues to speak her name, to remind people that this is not just a case file. This is a life that stopped without explanation. And that matters, because over time, cases like this can fade. They can become background noise. Another unsolved story among thousands. But for the people closest to Kayla, it never fades. It stays the same. The same question, the same night, the same absence. And after all these years, that question still doesn't have an answer. Which leaves us here, looking at the same details investigators had from the beginning, trying to understand how they never led anywhere. So let's talk about it. Because this case forces you to take a position, not based on emotion, but based on what you believe is most likely. So here's what I want to know from you. 1. Do you believe Kayla was ever actually dropped off near that condemned house? 2. If she was, do you think someone was already waiting for her there? 3. Do you think investigators missed something critical in those first 6 days? 4. Is it possible that the truth depends on someone who has never come forward? 5. And the hardest question of all, do you think this case will ever be solved? Drop your answers in the comments. I'm reading every single one, and I want to hear what you think, because this case doesn't give you easy answers. Because at its core, this story isn't just about what happened. It's about what didn't happen. No goodbye, no trace, no explanation. Just a 15-year-old girl who got into a car one night and was never seen again. And that might be the most unsettling part of all, because it means that somewhere between a simple car ride and a quiet street, something changed everything, and nobody has been able to explain it since. If you care about cases like this, where the truth hasn't been found and the questions never stopped, subscribe and turn on notifications. We release new investigations every day, and some of them, like this one, are still waiting for answers. Comment your location below so we can see how far these stories reach. And if Kayla's name stayed with you after this, share it, because sometimes attention is the only thing that keeps a case alive. And in a story built on silence, that might be the only way it ever gets broken. By the time law enforcement fully stepped in, something was already working against them. Time, not just hours, not just days. Nearly a week had passed between the night Kayla disappeared and when the situation was officially treated as a missing person case. In investigations like this, those first hours matter more than anything. They are when memories are sharp, when physical evidence is still where it was left, when small details can still be traced before they disappear. In Kayla's case, that window had already started to close. When officers began their work, they did what investigators always do first. They built a timeline. They retraced her last known movements. They spoke to the people who saw her, the people who knew her, and the people who were with her on that final night. And immediately, the entire case narrowed down to one person, Kevin Kilcheski. He was the last known person to see Kayla alive. He picked her up. He drove her around. He was there at the McDonald stop. And according to his account, he was the one who dropped her off near that condemned house in Wausau. So investigators focused on him. They interviewed him. They examined his car. They tried to confirm his story. And this is where things begin to feel off. Kevin told police that he drove Kayla roughly 35 miles and dropped her off near her boyfriend's place. But when investigators tried to verify that trip, there was no digital trail. No confirmed data placing him in Wausau that night. No independent evidence that clearly backed up his version of events. That does not automatically mean he lied. But in a case where everything depends on one account, the inability to confirm it creates a gap. And in that gap, uncertainty grows. Investigators also looked into Kayla's boyfriend, Miguel Marrero. He was 19. Kayla was 15. That alone had already made her mother uneasy about the relationship. But when police questioned him, they said he cooperated. There was no evidence directly linking him to Kayla's disappearance. No physical proof. No confirmed sighting placing Kayla with him that night. So once again, the case did not move forward. Instead, it stalled. And when a case stalls early, something dangerous can happen. The investigation begins to chase possibilities instead of evidence. Police searched the area around the condemned house. They brought in cadaver dogs. They checked nearby woods, abandoned buildings, empty lots. Places where someone could disappear without being seen. Nothing. They examined the car Kayla had been in. Nothing. They followed tips that came in from different places. Nothing that could be confirmed. And with each dead end, the case became harder to hold together. Because here's the problem. There was no crime scene. There was no confirmed location where something happened. There was no body. Without those anchors, investigators were working with fragments. Conversations. Assumptions. A timeline built almost entirely on what people said, not what could be proven. And that kind of case can drift. At first, some people believe Kayla had run away. It happens. Teenagers leave home. They stay with friends. They disappear for a while and come back. But the longer Kayla stayed missing, the less that theory made sense. She had no money, no phone, no clear plan. She had been looking forward to school. She had routines, relationships, expectations. Nothing about her life suggested she would vanish without a trace and never contact anyone again. So investigators had to consider something else. Foul play. But even that raised more questions than answers. If something happened to Kayla, where did it happen? If she was dropped off, who saw her next? If she was never dropped off, then what really happened inside that car? These are the kinds of questions that should lead somewhere. But in this case, they didn't. Instead, the investigation began to circle the same points again and again. Kevin's story, the condemned house, the boyfriend, the McDonald stop. Every road seemed to lead back to those same few details, and none of them broke open the case. And then there was another layer to the problem: communication. When Kayla first went missing, there was confusion between her parents about where she was supposed to be. That confusion delayed the urgency of the search. And by the time everything aligned and authorities realized something was truly wrong, too much time had passed. It's one of the most uncomfortable realities in missing person cases. Sometimes it's not one big mistake that changes everything. Sometimes it's small delays. Assumptions. Moments where people think everything is fine when it isn't. And by the time they realize, it's already too late. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation expanded. Law enforcement agencies beyond local police became involved. The case was entered into national databases. The Federal Bureau of Investigation listed Kayla as a missing person and later offered a reward for information. But even with that attention, there was still no breakthrough. No confirmed sighting. No physical evidence. No clear suspect. Just a growing silence. And that silence began to affect the people closest to Kayla. Her family kept searching, calling, asking questions, holding on to any possibility that someone, somewhere, had seen something. But the longer the case went without answers, the more it shifted, from an active search to a cold case. And when a case goes cold, it doesn't mean it's over. It just means it's waiting for a mistake, a confession, a piece of evidence that was missed the first time, a witness who decides to speak. But waiting can take years. And in Kayla's case, it did. Because after the initial investigation, something else started to happen. The story left the police files and entered the public. People began talking about it, sharing theories, looking at the details and trying to make sense of them. And one detail, more than any other, kept pulling attention. The drop-off. The idea that a 15-year-old girl was left at night near a condemned house that she supposedly knew was no longer her boyfriend's home. It didn't sit right with people. It didn't sound like a normal decision. And when something in a case doesn't sound right, it becomes the center of everything. Was she really dropped off there? Did she meet someone else? Or was that story covering something that happened earlier? These questions spread far beyond Wisconsin. They moved online, into forums, discussions, speculation, and for years, that's where the case stayed. Unresolved, unanswered, unfinished, until something unexpected happened. Years after Kayla disappeared, a video surfaced online. A disturbing video. A girl sitting in a basement, crying. A man speaking off camera. And for a moment, people believed they were watching Kayla. The resemblance, the voice, the timing. It felt too close to ignore. The internet exploded with one question. Was Kayla alive? And if she was, where had she been all this time? That moment reignited the case in a way nothing else had. But what came next would only deepen the mystery and change how people saw the case forever. So let me ask you this. If you were investigating this case, would you focus more on the last person who saw her or the place he said he left her? Comment below.